Uh-oh. Okay, we'll start with this. An expanded conversation about something that we touched on in my previous video. Mike Kopinger and Max Kellerman feel that Al Haymon should be inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame, and it's wrong that he isn't. They feel that that should be corrected. We touched on a lot of different subjects when it came to Al Haymon's influence on the sport. We often have to, as a lot of that influence has been adverse. When you think about the PBC and how they haven't been around all that long, they're actually the youngest promotional outfit that's out there. Top Rank, Golden Boy, Matchroom, Queensberry have actually been around longer. So how is it that an Al Haymon or somebody like that gets inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame? What would get someone like that there? What would have to be the scale of the events that they produce, that they promote, the fights that they put on, and how big they are. It's all in the name. The Boxing Hall of Fame. What are the biggest fights that the PBC has put on since their inception? What are the more famous ones? The Wilder vs. Fury trilogy almost immediately comes to mind. That's one of the bigger events the PBC has put on, that trilogy. The issue. Al Haymon can't get credit for putting that thing on because Al Haymon is not the registered promoter. The registered promoters are Tom Brown, Lou DiBella, and Frank Warren. And it's more or less the same for the other two, that when you talk about putting the event together and promoting it, Al Haymon's name does not appear there. Registered promoters are Bob Arum and Tom Brown again. So if you were going to give anybody the credit for putting that thing on and promoting it, you would have to give it to Tom Brown before you give it to Al Haymon. You would have to give it to Bob Arum before you give it to Al Haymon. You can't take the credit for that. It's the same with Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford. Yet another one of the bigger fights that the PBC has put on. And the registered promoters for that, Tom Brown, Terrence Crawford, Samson Lukowicz, Errol Spence Jr. But Al Haymon's name is nowhere to be found. Can't take the credit for that one. He can't take the credit for Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia. It's more of the same there. The registered promoters are Tom Brown and Oscar De La Hoya, and that one is arguably the biggest fight the PBC has ever put on. It's the only pay-per-view they did that cracked 1 million buys.
Wait a minute. That piece of shit is the biggest fight they ever put on?
It absolutely is. The PBC don't have a track record of putting on pay-per-views that often do 1 million or in excess of 1 million. Hell, most of the time, the pay-per-views they do come in at well under half a million. The biggest fights the PBC has ever put on: the Wilder vs. Fury trilogy, Spence vs. Crawford, and Gervonta Davis vs. Ryan Garcia. That's it. And Al Haymon is not the registered promoter for any of those fights. So how could he get the credit? Take credit for what? Common sense would dictate that Al Haymon had more of a role in those situations than just a manager or an advisor, but attempting to give him the credit would expose that he's been violating the Muhammad Ali Act all this time. The okie doke, the old switcheroo. Over there at the PBC, they call the managers the promoters and they call Al Haymon the manager, when it's actually the other way around. It's not Samson Lukowicz that brokered a deal with Fox or Showtime. It was Al. What Samson really was a manager with a couple of fighters under contract. It was the same with Lou DiBella when he was in their good graces and he was
over there. He had more of a managerial role with the fighters than the promoters. He's not the one that had the Fox deal. He's not the one that had the Showtime deal. It's the same with Tom Brown. TGB did not broker a deal with either of those networks. Al did. So by all rights, Al is the promoter, just not on paper, so he can't get the credit.
And this is how he's been able to work around the Muhammad Ali Act all this time. Over there at the PBC, they call the managers the promoter, and they call the promoter the manager. By some chance, they were to manufacture a category that Al Haymon could then occupy. Do you imagine that he would be in attendance to receive such an award for his Hall of Fame induction?
Man's basically a recluse.
So it may seem like an oddity to a lot of people that as much as Al Haymon is known within the boxing space, in the boxing sphere, and talked about, and what influence he's had on the sport, good or bad, that he's not getting any level of recognition for it, at least not officially, that has everything to do with how the PBC has operated for all these years. Yes, it's an oddity, but Al Haymon is an odd guy.
We have a tremendous roster, and in the US, that's the market where we're going to double down more than anything moving forward in 2026. We have, in my opinion, such a strong position. A lot of these big promotional companies out there, they don't have a TV deal. We do, and we have a solid deal with a big bankroll to go and make the biggest fights in the sport. 2026, we've got to make it count, and we will be making it count in America.
So this is kind of the opposite of what I thought would happen. I thought that after all this time in the American market and seeing how unstable things are here, how expensive, tough crowd, hard to impress, perhaps Matchroom might withdraw from America a bit to focus more on the UK, especially now that Boxer's not on Sky anymore.
It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. I mean, what if Frank Smith focuses on the UK and Eddie Hearn focuses on the US? They can do it.
But it really isn't what I thought would happen because US boxing is in the crapper. So what would Matchroom doing more to corner the US market look like in the coming calendar year? It is true that a lot of the big-time promotional outfits are in a vulnerable state. The PBC doesn't do very many regular shows anymore. Most of what they do are pay-per-views, and that's only 5 or 6 times a year if they're lucky.
Their carbon footprint, as it were, in the sport, it is fading.
Gervonta Davis is off to Netflix, and he might retire after that. David Benavidez, he's talking about breaking away, doing his own thing. Meanwhile, Top Rank still has yet to announce their new broadcast partner or partners moving forward. It looks like they're going to sit out the rest of the year. And these two promotional outfits, more than anyone, have posed the biggest challenges to Matchroom since they started operating in America. These were Matchroom's biggest competitors,
making now the most opportune time to try and corner this market. They've tried in the past, but things were a lot more competitive then than they are now. So I see the logic. What about the strategy?
Boots has got to be a big part of that strategy's bottom line. One of Matchroom's U.S. stars, U.S. fighters, but not just Boots. Bam Rodriguez. And I imagine that perhaps Matchroom might try to have these fighters fighting more often instead of just 2 times a year, maybe 3 times a year. Diego Pacheco's bunched in there, so is Ammo Williams.
And whatever other fighters they might sign, male or female, because you have to figure if the goal is to corner the U.S. market, you're going to need some fresh new faces, fresh new blood.
I've long made the recommendation that they should perhaps sign unbeaten up-and-comer in the super bantamweight division, Micaiah Krebs. Now that Ellie Scottney has jumped ship from Matchroom over to MVP, they can replace her with Micaiah. And what about unbeaten up-and-comer in the atomweight division, Camila Zamorano of Mexico? By now, Eddie Hearn has to know that the Mexican-American fight fan moves the needle in this country, so it can't hurt to sign a few Mexican fighters, maybe one of them female.
Castaways.
It was recently announced that Rayo Valenzuela has become a network and promotional free agent. Granted that Rayo Valenzuela has 2 or 3 losses in there, you can still use him. You can use him on undercards. Big fights. You've got to make big fights. I feel like Sugar Nunez versus Emmanuel Navarrete would be a significant fight. a consequential fight, a fight between two Mexican champions in the super featherweight division that wouldn't be as expensive to put on as some other fights. Matchroom has to have fights like this in mind.
I mean, there's definitely a void to fill, and we felt it. All through the month of August and the month of September, the void left behind by both the PBC and Top Rank being in a weakened and vulnerable state to where PBC's not doing anywhere near as many shows as they used to, and Top Rank didn't do any at all the last 2 months.
So the opportunity is there based on the void left behind by their competition, and what the strategy might look like once it's implemented is getting their U.S. fighters more active and signing new ones to complement them in the hopes that you can corner that market and fill the void in the United States.
Xander Sayas couldn't get made.
You know, I wasn't at the table, they were mentioning things look, we fought Booker and he was the number 4, number 5 for the WBO, and that was supposed to be the defense for the WBO because no one was mandatory at the time. But as soon as that fight happened, they mandated that Zayas fight. So like, I thought we just defended this title for them. So, they had their own plans. I guess that was the plan from the beginning too. I remember after being sued the first time, they wanted us to fight Crawford two months later. And our nose was still swollen. They didn't, no care for the fighters. So, they have their own ideas or whatever. The WBO, it is what it is. It is what it is.
Now, we talked about that set of comments in my previous video, and it would seem that WBO President Gustavo Olivieri has his own thoughts on it. He said the facts are clear. Fundora's mandatory was overdue, and his team initially confirmed fulfilling that obligation first with Crawford and later with Zayas. Then at the 11th hour, they chose not to comply. Therefore, the title was vacated. Any claim to the contrary misrepresents the record.
It's exactly what Sebastian Fundora is doing. I like to think of him as an honest kid, but that was a very dishonest answer that he gave Marcos Villegas because it was never their intention to fight Terence Crawford. The night that he beat Tim Tszyu, his handler Samson Lukowicz said it right then and there. Crawford has to wait because they wanted to fight Errol Spence. It was never their intention to fight Terence Crawford, to the point they lied about the severity of Sebastian's injuries in the Tim Tszyu fight. Or did you forget? They claimed that Sebastian Fundora's nose was broken and that he would not be able to return until later on in the year. But they only said that as an excuse to get out of the Crawford fight because they knew that Terence Crawford was Sebastian's mandatory challenger and they didn't want to fight him. Well, how do you know that they were lying? Because of what Sebastian Fundora later told Cynthia Conte of the Best Women's Boxing podcast, period. He's the one who spilt the beans.
Terence Crawford said that he wanted you next. That was supposed to be the plan. When I asked you earlier, you had this look like that was not ever the plan. Was that true, that you were not able to fight for a year medically?
They gave us a little, I think 2 months or whatever, because the fight went 12 rounds. The normal suspension in Vegas.
Okay.
And we got that. But, they were giving us a contract that was already made for us. We were supposed to fight him in June.
For Crawford?
For Crawford, after a fight like that, doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense to me.
You had a broken nose, no?
Yeah, that's what they say,
Oh. Well, I mean...
What do you mean they? There is no they. The one who said you've got a broken nose was your promoter, Samson Lukowicz. What are you saying? That Samson was exaggerating? That Samson was lying?
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense to
You
me.
had a broken nose, no?
Yeah, that's what they say,
Oh. Well, I mean, based on that fight, you both were bloody somewhere.
It was a bloody fight, but I don't think neither of us were damaged like that. They were giving us dates.
I remember after being sued the first time, they wanted us to fight Crawford two months later. And our nose was still swollen. They didn't, no care for the fighters, so,
It doesn't make sense to
You
me.
had a broken nose, no?
Yeah, that's what they say,
Oh. Well, I mean...
But I don't think neither of us were damaged like that.
No care for the fighters, so,
Last year he told Cynthia that his nose wasn't broken and neither guy was all that damaged, so that this year he can tell Marcos the WBO doesn't care about the fighters.
My nose was still busted.
It would seem that young Sebastian Fundora can't get his story straight which is in keeping with any Samson Lukowicz fighter and what you can expect. Near as I can tell, they never had any intention of facing Terence Crawford, and they made that very clear the night he became champion.
The night Sebastian won the belt, they made it known. Crawford's gotta wait. They want to fight Spence.
And the stuff with Xander Zayas, they never had any intention of fighting him either.
Well, look, we fought Booker, and he was the number 4, number 5 for the WBO. And that was supposed to be the defense for the WBO because no one was mandatory at the time.
It's yet another misrepresentation of the facts, as Gustavo suggested. Sebastian fought Cordell Booker in March of this year. At that time, the interim champion was Terence Crawford.
Though even if by then people knew that Crawford would be moving up to super middle for the fight with Canelo, the next man in line wasn't Cordell Booker. The next man in line was Xander Zayas, who was ranked at number 2. So why would you think you're satisfying a mandatory by fighting Cordell Booker, who was ranked below him?
That's not how this works, and you know that's not how this works. If the top guy isn't available for whatever reason, they move down to the next available guy, the next highest rated contender, and that was Xander, who you had no intention of fighting.
He didn't have any intention of fighting either of them.
And I like that Gustavo Olivieri is a no-nonsense president who put him on the spot and called him out for his shenanigans. That Sebastian's real problem with the WBO is that they won't let him just hang back and have his pick of the litter like the World Boxing Council, like the WBC, that the WBO orders their mandatories in a timely fashion and they expect a response promptly. The inconsistencies in Sebastian's story may seem hard to keep up with, but all you need to know and understand is he never wanted to fight Crawford and he was never going to, and he wasn't going to fight Xander either. That's the crux of it.
And the WBO did what was appropriate in that situation. The whole dog ate my homework.
Blase kind of attitude towards your obligations as a champion should not stifle the ranks and prevent them from moving. You've got mandatories. If you can't satisfy them, then you don't need to hold that title. And it's as simple as that. In an ideal world, every sanctioning body president would behave more like Gustavo, who is not only transparent, but firm in his rulings, his decisions. You're not going to slander the WBO for doing their job. They're doing what they're supposed to do. You don't want to.
What makes that more obvious? Look at who he's about to fight. He's about to fight Keith Thurman.
Jesus.
The whole time Bakram Murtazaliev is out here with nothing to do and nobody to fight, nobody to unify with, that wasn't even an option for Sebastian Fundora. Let me fight the has-been.
Let me go fight a sparsely active Keith Thurman in his mid-30s whose best days are so obviously behind him and has done next to nothing in the junior middleweight division. That's much better than a unification fight.
You gotta call these guys out. I'm telling you.
I'm glad that Gustavo held his feet to the fire. This is the problem with fighters having a bit too much wiggle room to do what they want. Do you think they want the hard fights? The difficult ones?
Nope.
Let them tell it, and they're not afraid of anybody. They'll fight anybody.
Yeah, fucking right. More like you'll fight anybody but Bakram, anybody but Bud, anybody but Zayas.
Anybody but the capable fighters and the elite fighters in your division. Yeah, anybody but them.